Savory meets sweet and Italian Stromboli meets cinnamon roll. Today we are exploring one of the holiday favorites in Venezuela, the Venezuelan pan de jamón, a savory with a little sweet holiday ham bread. Eating pan de jamón in Venezuela at Christmas time is like eating turkey in the US on Thanksgiving. It's just expected, and people mostly love it. Believe it or not, this sweet and savory all-in-one bread shouts holiday time. After all, the holidays are full of indulgence, right? Why not mix a little sweet with a little savory? Imagine an enriched, buttery, slightly sweetened dough baked with swirls of layered ham, green olives with pimentos, and raisins. At first, it's difficult to decide, is it savory or is it sweet? But once you take a bite, you discover that it's both. Truth is, it's actually a savory, salty bread thanks to the olives and ham with hints of sweetness from the raisins. Altogether, this bread has lots of well-balanced flavors that keep you coming back for more. The idea of this bread is thought to have first been created in the early 20th century, 1905 to be exact, by a bakery owner who only used sliced ham in the layered swirls. As word spread, other bakers added the olives and raisins, which became the basic version of the spread. Today, you can find many variations of this recipe to include cream cheese and turkey in the layers. Be sure to check out my recipe linked below for the many optional layer substitutions that also include bacon or nuts as an option. Today, we are all about the original version with ham, olives, and raisins. The traditional Venezuelan Christmas ham bread truly is a nice addition to the holiday table. It's great as an appetizer, a light holiday lunch served with a nice warm bowl of soup, or alongside your traditional Christmas meal. For all the sweet treats highlighted during the holiday season, why not add a little savory one to that list? Let's check out this really cool recipe. I am really excited about this. It is quite fun to make, and Scott has very much enjoyed eating it. Thanks to our Venezuelan friends from our recipes inspiration. For this recipe, you'll need milk, yeast, granulated sugar, butter, eggs, all-purpose flour, salt, thinly sliced ham, raisins, and pimento stuffed green olives. Well, you know how it all begins. We need to activate the yeast. So in a small bowl, you're going to add 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast, which is the same as a package from the store. Go ahead and measure out 1/4 cup of sugar, and then from that 1/4 cup, we're going to take 1 tablespoon and add that to the yeast. Now, you don't always have to add sugar when you're activating the yeast if you're using milk, because milk has sugar in it, for the lactose. Heat up milk in the microwave for about 30 seconds so that the milk is between 100 and 110 degrees. As long as it's lower than 115, you should be fine. And that's 1 cup, by the way, and we are just going to whisk the milk with our sugar and our yeast. And so now we're just going to set this aside for about 10 minutes or less for it to become bubbly and frothy. In another small bowl, we're going to melt 2 ounces of butter, which is 1/4 cup. If your butter is super soft, then you probably don't need to dice it up. Heat your butter up in the microwave for 20 seconds until all of the solids are just melted. And then again, we want to make sure that our butter is not too hot, which if you put it in for 20 seconds, it should be fine. Then we're going to add in a full egg, and we're going to beat it into our butter. And the egg should be at room temperature. You don't want that cold egg to solidify the butter, and you don't want that too hot of butter to cook the egg. I'm using my stand mixer to knead the dough today, but you could always just use your hands, spoon, in a bowl and be fine. Just follow along. You're gonna add 420 grams of all-purpose flour, and that is 3 1/2 cups. We're gonna add the remaining sugar that we'd measured out, from which we took 1 tablespoon. And then I'm using salted butter today, so I'm only going to add 3/4 teaspoon of salt. If you're using unsalted butter, use a teaspoon of salt. And then we're just going to whisk it all together. Pretty simple. Since our yeast is now frothy and bubbly, add your egg and butter to the yeast, and then just give it a quick stir. I like to make a well in my flour mixture before I pour in my wet ingredients, because it just makes it a little easier to stir it all around. Once you get your wet ingredients into the dry, then just use a spatula. You could start with a whisk if you wanted to, but just give it a good quick stir, kind of get it all combined. And we're actually going to add more flour, up to 1 cup, but we want to start out with little flour and add more as we go, because your environment will determine the total amount of flour you're going to need. So right now, all we want to do is get that flour from the bottom of the bowl mixed in to those wet ingredients. You know you've stirred it good enough at this point, because when you move that dough around, you don't see much flour, so go ahead and pull in the rest of that flour into the dough. And now we're gonna transfer this to our stand mixer. If using a bowl and your hands, go ahead and keep stirring, adding in more flour until it becomes too stiff to stir, and then you'll knead on a floured surface. You're gonna add your dough hook at this point because our dough is pretty much too thick for us to stir. So our dough is still very sticky. So we're just gonna start the machine on low, and we're gonna slowly add 1 tablespoon of flour at a time. I've actually measured out 1 full cup, but I'm probably not gonna use it. This is 120 grams. Just add it to the dough and let it knead for a few minutes. It should be not sticky, but a little tacky. If not, keep adding more flour. You're gonna knead for 8 to 10 minutes. If kneading by hand, knead for 10 minutes. Okay, as you were kneading, you should have increased your speed up to medium. Kneaded for that 10 minutes. I only needed to add 1 more tablespoon of flour, and look at my dough. It's not sticky anymore. It doesn't look dry. It was pulling away from the bowl, and that's what we want. You could also do the technique to check to see if it's kneaded enough by stretching the dough. If you can see through it like a window pane, then you've kneaded it enough, and we've got that. So ours is good. Take a spatula and scrape down the edges. You can leave the dough in the bowl. If you've been kneading by hand, then place your dough back in the bowl, whatever bowl you were using, preferably a large bowl because we want this to double in size. And I'm actually going to spray, I'll put it in a clear bowl just so you can see a little better. I'm gonna spray my bowl and the top and sides of my dough, just in case it rises pretty high. In this particular bowl, it could rise to the top. Don't want it to stick to the plastic. So just leave it in a nice little ball. Cover it in plastic wrap or a towel, just as you normally would do with dough. So now it's time to place our bowl with the dough in it over in a warm area for the dough to rise. We want it to double in size. It's gonna take anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half. Just check it at the hour mark and see where you are. You wanna go ahead and prepare your pan. So all you need to do is just get a cookie sheet. I have one that's at least 17 by 12, and that's a good size for me. And then you need to cut some parchment paper that fit on the cookie sheet, but we're actually gonna roll the dough on the parchment paper, and then we're gonna lift the parchment paper up with the dough on it and place it on the cookie sheet when we're ready to let it rise for its second time. The dough has risen. Let's take a quick look at it. It is definitely doubled in size. I like to see that condensation underneath the plastic. That means it's really created a nice heated environment. On your parchment paper that we're going to use to cook the bread on, we need to lightly flour it. It just makes it easy to roll and manipulate the dough if you just use the same parchment paper. All right, let's deflate it from the bowl. We're not doing any more kneading here. We're simply just going to roll. Go ahead and flour your hands. And then I like to start just patting mine out just to get it in sort of a rough rectangle shape. And our rectangle is gonna be a 17 by 12, which is basically, you just want it a 1/4 inch thick. So whatever that means for you. We want a relatively thin dough so that we can roll it like a cinnamon roll, but we're gonna have meat and olives and raisins in it. So we don't want it too thick, since we've got quite a bit of filling. My dough is 17 by 13, 14. It's good enough. You want to soften 2 tablespoons of butter, so room temperature, or just put in the microwave for 10 seconds, and that should be enough. And then just brush the butter all around your dough. You want to go from edge to edge and end to end. This adds a little bit of gooiness, but also helps to keep your fillings together. We're gonna add ham, and we're gonna leave about a 1/2 inch space from the end of the ham to the edge of the bread. We're gonna overlap the ham slices. I am using thinly sliced Black Forest ham. You could, of course, use any type of ham that you want. You could use a honey ham, whatever you have or you like. You're gonna need about a 1/2 pound. Sprinkle 3 ounces of green olives that have pimento in them. Pimento is traditional here. Just spread them out. And lastly, we're gonna add 3 ounces of raisins. You could use golden raisins. You could even use cranberries here if you don't like raisins. You could, of course, leave them out, but we're going traditional here. And they do taste good. Well, according to Scott. Just spread them out well so you don't get clumps of them in a bite. This looks pretty good. That we should be able to get a bite of everything in one bite. So now it's just time to roll it up. So you're gonna start at one short end Just like you would a cinnamon roll, try to roll it tight. You could use the parchment paper to help you roll it up as you go. See how easy that was on parchment paper? Okay, now the hardest part is moving it. So we need to carefully lift this because we don't want to create gaps. That's beautiful log. That's almost a perfect shape there. All right, so our seam is down, so there shouldn't be any opening up. Notice the rolls at the end. It's a pretty roll at the end. I like that. We do want to seal the ends a little bit so that nothing oozes out, falls out. So just go ahead and round off your ends by sealing it. See what I did there? Since we can see some of our filling in there, we definitely want to close that off. Make sure this is centered on your parchment. Okay, now we're just going to lift it up and place it on our cookie sheet. Since the ham loaf is ready to rise, at this step, all we have to do is just cover it. You can use plastic wrap, towel, or both. We're gonna sit it over in a warm area. I'm just putting mine over my warm stove, and we're gonna let it rise. It's gonna take about an hour for it to get pretty puffy. The last 20 to 30 minutes of the rise, preheat your oven to 350 degrees. The loaf has puffed up nicely. It's ready for the oven. But before we bake it, we need to add the egg wash. So to make the egg wash, you need to beat an egg in a small bowl. And then we're gonna add a tablespoon of water. You don't have to measure this. I'm just gonna add a little bit of water in there. Good enough? Mix it up. Probably don't even need to add any water anyway. It just sort of helps to smooth it out a little bit, loosen it up. Take a brush and your little egg, and then just gonna brush it over the loaf. You wanna get the top, the sides, the ends. So what the egg wash does is it darkens the loaf as it bakes, and it gives it a nice, pretty glossy, crunchy exterior. Once you've finished with that, we're gonna just poke some holes with our fork. I'm just gonna do a line of them on the sides, on the top. And the purpose of this is just to allow the steam to escape, but also to prevent any crazy bulges and pops from the dough as it rises in the oven and bakes. So that just gives it some space to relieve any pressure from heat and steam. Now that our loaf is ready, go ahead and place it in the oven on the center rack. Our oven has preheated to 350 degrees. Bake for 45 minutes to an hour, or until the internal temperature reaches 190 degrees. It should be baked completely. Check it out, our beautiful loaf is baked. So guess what? We're gonna add some more indulgence to this. Rush on some butter to make it nice and shiny as though it's not already there. You'll need 1 to 2 tablespoons of butter. It should be really, really soft or melted. And then we're just going to brush it over the top. Brush it all around the sides and the edges. Once we brush all of this on, we're gonna allow it to cool for actually just 10 minutes, and then we can cut right in to it and eat it. Now remember, this has meat in it, so you don't want to leave this out on the counter any longer than you would normally meat that you're consuming. So at some point you're gonna have to slice this and put it in the refrigerator or freezer. And since it's bread, you don't want it to dry out. So refrigerator is not the best place to put bread. You wanna put it in the freezer. Heat it up when you're ready to eat it. And if you slice it, it makes it easy to thaw and heat up in the microwave or in an oven. All ready to cool for just a few minutes. All right, let's check out this monster loaf of a bread. The bread's softened up since we added the butter. Okay, there you go. Take a look. The bread definitely separated from the top layer to the ham. The bread is cooked all the way. Notice that you've got definitely the layers of the ham. You could get a bite of ham, you could get the olives are dispersed throughout, and of course the raisins are dispersed throughout. Looks nice on the inside, doesn't it? Can you imagine a slice of this with some cheese, maybe some Gruyere, Swiss for that matter, toasted? Make a nice accompaniment with soup. Well, our resident taste tester is back. When he smells food, he comes a-running, don't you?
Oh, you were baking today?
Yeah. You guys should know that this man eats not only the bakes that you see on camera, but most of all the test bakes, which is sometimes 4 to 6 additional versions of what we have here. So he can put food away like nobody else. We have a lot of funny stories of him being able to eat massive amounts of food in his early 20s.
Yeah, I'm not trained to do it anymore though.
Yeah, he slowed down just a little bit. All right, Scott, go ahead and give it a taste. It's Venezuelan pan de jamón ham bread.
So what's in this? Is this chocolate chips that I see?
Why don't you take a bite and see? Chocolate chips. There you go. Your kids may like ham and chocolate chips together. All right, chocolate chips, what's the verdict? You've had quite a bit of this bread, so you know this bread fairly well.
Very unique flavors.
You know, I think this is one of those breads, if you don't taste it, you go, eh? Because of raisins, olives, and ham. But think about it, in delis, people serve ham on olive bread, but then raisins, what can you add about the raisins?
So I get the ham and olives, that makes sense. Those are both savory in nature, but the raisins, if you were to tell me that ahead of time, then that sounds a little weird, but it works because the raisins are a little bit sweet to complement the savory.
And think about it, ham has a sweetness to it. If you buy a honey ham, people will use brown sugar to bake the ham. It really does go together.
It works. It is a unique flavor. I wouldn't think of putting raisins in with a salty meat bread. I don't know. It tastes like a ham and cheese with maybe cranberry dressing or something. That would be kind of an analogous to what we would have in the United States.
What about a Monte Cristo sandwich?
Yeah, that's an even better example.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a Monte Cristo to some extent. So
there you go. So it works. If you've never tried it, you should give it a taste. If you're looking for something a little different to put on your holiday table this season, take a stab at making this bread. You know, if you don't want to make the dough or you don't have time, you can absolutely use puff pastry and still follow the recipe for the layered swirls. What do you think about the bread? Because it isn't an enriched dough. It has butter and sugar.
Honestly, the bread's a little bit of an afterthought. I know this is summer bakes the world, but the ham has such a strong flavor and the olives have such a strong flavor. The bread's kind of secondary. The bread is supporting those other pieces. Yeah. However, that being said, it's a soft bread on the inside with a little bit of a hard crust, but not hard like a baguette hard. It is a good complementing bread for the ingredients.
Thank you so much for your support in watching, subscribing, and sharing. Knowing that you're out there is an encouragement for me. We wish you and yours a very happy holiday season, and until next time, go bake the world.